Hello, hello, hello out there in podcast land. You have reached Johnny Has the Keys, where we talk about key elements in horror and sci-fi cinema that elevate properties a little bit above the genre fare. Wouldn't you say sometimes that happens, David?
I would say so, yes. We elevate. That's what we do.
By the way, everybody, this is my co-host, Mr. David Horton.
Hello, everybody.
Yeah, I was thinking about the word keys the other day. You know, we kind of got a metaphor going with our name. And key elements, I think, it's a shortened version of the word key elements that make a film classic or elevate a film's potential as far as where it fits in the canon of the overall genre. Now, we don't always do spectacular classics, although most of ours are on the 1001 movies to see before you die.
That's right.
But sometimes we may just do a real clunker for the heck of it.
Well, but these are podcasts you should listen to before you die. So we're doing the podcasts you should listen to before you die. So that works for me.
Yes. You know. But I mean, we don't mean to exclude any dead listeners out there.
No. All dead listeners.
If you're dead and you're out there listening, keep it up.
Keep it up. Yes.
So, what's been going on this week with you, David?
Not a lot. Lots of work and stuff like that, which is a good thing for moi, but it hasn't allowed me a lot of leisure. I did, and I may have mentioned this on another podcast, but I did finish The Expanse, the new 4th season, which is on Amazon Prime now, and went back and watched a couple of the other episodes that I liked in season 2 and 3, and still just a brilliant sci-fi series. I highly recommend it. I think it's the best science fiction on television right now. And from a fan,
you mentioned that you didn't go into the fact that you had finished the season or anything.
Yes,
you just brought up that it was back on.
Yeah, and I think I know you have started it, but not gotten much into it. But it's making me, that cycle we talk about sometimes on the podcast. It's making me want to go now and get the novels and read them, because it's based on a series of novels, like 7 books or something like that are co-written by 2 guys, and supposedly the seasons are following pretty closely the books, and that's kind of cool. I joined like a fan page, and they talk about it. They talk about, I can't believe that they cut this scene, or I'm glad they kept this scene or this character or whatever. So evidently they're doing pretty well. I mean, staying pretty true to the novels, which is cool. And then the only other thing genre related I have is just still putting my flag in the ground or stake in the ground or whatever and saying, I loathe Baby Yoda. I hate Baby Yoda. I'm not a fan of Baby Yoda. And I want to try to work it into every podcast from now on. Say no to Baby Yoda. Because people are
this
now.
This is the genesis. I don't think you've done that before.
Well, yes, because I can't. It's gotten crazy. I did see a great meme that I thought was so perfect, and it was showing George Lucas holding the little Baby Yoda puppet and everything else, and the puppet was talking to him, and it was said, "Back up, George. I am Star Wars now." I said, "It's so true, so true." I know people don't even like Star Wars that love Baby Yoda, and I'm like, "What? It's not. It's not."
Exactly, or I've never even watched a Star Wars episode or film. Yeah, it's those memes are kind of out of control. It's kind of like the woman screaming at the cat meme.
Yeah, and I hate to admit it, but I will. That it took me a lot of time and effort to figure out what that meme even meant. It was the first real meme that I didn't get, and I felt so old and out of touch and everything.
I'm not sure that I get it. I just think it's funny.
Well, it seems to be the opposite iteration is what the cat is doing. So whatever they're doing, the cat is justifying it with some little quip or something, is what I think I interpret it as. So there's that.
And isn't it like some like housewife show or something?
I think
I figured that's one of them women from a housewife show.
Probably from Georgia. They're from Atlanta. They're the housewives.
Atlanta, maybe. I don't know. I don't know. I avoid those housewives. I've avoided housewives for a long time, David. I thought you knew.
But yeah, so that's what I kind of caught up a little bit on The Expanse. I kind of cussed out Baby Yoda, and that's basically been it. What about you? What have you been doing?
Well, I, at your encouragement, steered myself over to Amazon Prime Video the other day and finally caught Midsommar.
Ooh, yes.
I was very entertained. I know it's kind of a controversial subject because I am a member of a lot of horror movie groups and what have you on Facebook, and a lot of people are like, boring, piece of shit, they hate it, whatever, and I'm like, yeah, I don't want to watch what you like because this movie is awesome. It is a long movie. It is a slow burn, but I'm a fan of those type of movies. And I've mentioned before, Ari Aster is the guy that directed Aster, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, Hereditary with Toni Collette.
Yeah,
which is
still haven't
slow
watched.
burn movie.
Yep.
Ooh, I mean, it's a hard one. Very ominous, very slow, and a lot of dread. And I get the same from Midsommar. It's clearly an homage to a movie we're going to be covering later this season, which is The Wicker Man. Basically dealing with an odd pagan religion in Sweden and some college students that go over there and do a little bit of an anthropological study. And
yeah, when I saw it,
insanity ensues.
Agreed. When I saw it, I was like, "Oh my gosh!" But I loved. It wasn't just the story and the pace and that whole feeling of something is not right. Something is going to bust up here in a minute. It's going to be bad. That dread, which I love in a good horror movie. It wasn't just that. It was the way he did stuff. First of all, I think telling a horror movie in the bright daylight is kind of a challenge. It reminded me a lot of like It Follows. So many scenes in that are scary, but they're during the day. It's not a nighttime scary.
Or Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah. Dawn of the Dead's another good one. But just some of his ideas and his framing and things like when even near the beginning, when she goes over to tell them that she's decided to go with them on the trip, and the way the whole scene is shot is looking at all the guys sitting at the couches, and she's standing in the mirror reflected up above them. And they do the whole scene that way. It's like a 3-minute scene of just one shot of her talking to them. And that's just really cool. And like when they're in the car first arriving in Sweden, and the whole car, literally the frame goes upside down. And we watch the car drive.
When they're driving,
yeah.
That blew me away. I was like, who does that? That is such a crazy camera angle, to be completely upside down.
And
that was awesome. I forgot about that.
Yeah, and not in your face like Sam Raimi does or something. It was just his choices are so appropriate. In the final scene, not giving anything away since people may not have seen it yet, but that final pullback from the face all the way back and everything else is like this one long, extended Kubrickian kind of lengthy shot. And I was going, oh my gosh, it just makes you force you to watch almost, which is cool, which I really like. Yeah. Good choice for you for a horror movie. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It had been on my list. I was waiting for it to get to a streaming platform. The same as The Lighthouse, which is, Robert Eggers, the guy that did The Witch. I don't know. I've said it before and I'll say it again. There seems to be this little cabal of horror directors emerging that I'm very excited about. Those two, you can honestly say our topic last week, Jordan Peele, He is another.
Yeah.
That's just barnstorming with these great horror films.
Agreed.
And not apologetic about it at all. I mean, Jordan Peele won an Oscar for screenplay. He could go on to do anything he wants, and he's still directing horror movies and working on a Candyman reboot.
Yeah.
So, more power to him.
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, and I think it is kind of a little rebirth of horror genre auteurs, not just here's the latest sequel, here's the latest slasher, something like that. They're doing new stuff in new ways, and I really, I think you're right. There's some good people out there.
And they're also paying attention to the predecessors that, like The Wicker Man or like, Stepford Wives, what have you. They're paying homage as well as embellishing and making them their own.
To the other keys.
But anyway...
Yes. I think that's...
Enough about horror territory, because this week we are in your territory, which would be the science fiction realm.
Yes.
With a little movie that came out in 1989. Actually, not a little movie at the time, called The Abyss.
Yep. Yes, it's written and directed by James Cameron. It was produced by Galen Hurd. It did get a lot of press and a lot of hype when it came out, mostly because Cameron was coming off of Aliens, which had been the movie he had done before. So everybody was like watching him and saying he's the new rising star, kind of what we were saying. It didn't do. It didn't flop at the box office, but it didn't do very well either. And I think once we finish our podcast today, people may know at least why we think it has some issues, because I do. But maybe a little brief synopsis first. So basically, it's very simple synopsis, really. It is the story. The story begins with an American nuclear submarine, which is visited by something odd and glowing in the water, forcing it to crash. Which means the Navy wants to send in a SEAL team to make sure that they investigate it and find out what happens before the Russians get there, because the Russians have sent subs and ships into the area. The only way the Navy can do that is to send a SEAL team aboard an underwater operating oil rig. And so the Navy SEALs have to descend to the oil rig, and they have to use the oil miners, a la, the first key that I ever saw in this was the one with, now I forgot the name of it, and I had it written down. The one with Bruce Willis, and I'm going to go mine an asteroid.
You're talking about Armageddon.
Armageddon.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, the first big key really is Armageddon, and the fact that, I have to use these miners to accomplish this task that they're not trained for. And then basically that's the plot, is as they investigate the submarine, they find out what these glowing objects are. And actually they never find out what these glowing objects are. They just kind of embrace them and say, hey, they're here. Which is, in my opinion, part of the problems of this movie. What about you? I mean, did you like this movie? Had you seen it recently or anything?
I don't really think I've seen this movie since it came out. Excuse me, at the theater, and I don't remember being blown away by it. Because had I would have watched it again since. I did enjoy it a lot watching it again last night. The performances are great. It's great seeing some of these guys young again, because this movie is 30 years old. I didn't mind it as much, but it does have a very ambiguous ending. It has a very happy ending, which is not, the worst thing in the world, but sometimes you need a death to be grounded in reality a little more. And there's really the only person that dies in this movie is the bad guy. So
Well, and six of the guys, on the oil rig, but we didn't really know them very much.
Right,
They
were
like
secondary characters.
kind
Yeah,
of thing.
yeah. But I do.
Yeah,
like
I mean, I'd
it.
have to agree.
I mean, I do enjoy it. It's a little long, and from what I understand, he trimmed it considerably.
Did you watch? Did you watch the 2:15 version or the 2:51 version?
I watched
Because there
whatever
are two different
versions on
versions of this
HBO. I don't know.
Okay, that was the 2:15. So that was the one without the whole ending that they ended up having to cut out, and then they re-released for the DVD, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I'm with you. I mean, if we're talking about goods and bads of this movie, I think the casting was really strong. I really liked the cast, even some of the secondary characters. I liked Jammer, and I liked the
Hippie.
Hippie, of course. Well, Hippie's kind of overwritten a little bit, and a key I had to him was the dude from The Thing. That was always in the background going. No, the other one, the one that was always stoned, going. Yeah, chariots of the gods, man. They practically own South America.
Yeah.
I mean, he reminded me of that kind of writing, that kind of character. I think that was definitely. Of course, this was written by Cameron, and I've always said Cameron is not a writer and should not write. I think he's a good director, but I do not think he's a good writer. And I think the majority of the problems I have with this movie are in the script itself. But I think the cast was really good, really strong. There's some cliches in it among the characters and the way they're done, but overall they all do it really well. I personally loved the way it's shot and the way it's filmed, the fact that 40% of it is underwater. Literally, they filmed it underwater, and you can tell, and it works. I remember at the time being really excited because I knew that it had been filmed in North Carolina, which is near us.
South Carolina,
so I
actually.
That it was in Gaffney.
Yeah.
And I liked that part of it. I loved a lot of the effects in it and the fact that they merged so seamlessly. So, like, they filmed underwater, but then they also filmed in a dry tank with miniatures. They also filmed in pools and everything else. And the way it cuts together is really good. And I love the technical ambition of the whole project. I think that's what I liked about it. But as a movie as a whole, I'm kind of like you. I think it's a little long. It feels like the end of Lord of the Rings, saying that, it has 3 different endings kind of feel. Could have ended the movie here. Oh, no. Could have ended it here. Oh, no. We keep going. And like you said, even that was the cut version and not the long version that he did. But without the long version, we really have no point to the movie. I mean, like, what would you say is the theme of this movie?
That it takes a crisis and a lot of stress to reinvigorate a relationship.
Sure, that's it.
I mean, really, that's kind of what it is. It's kind of like a love story. With some aliens and an underwater rig. I'm curious. I mean, what I was gonna say we go to next, unless you still have something, was you have mentioned in the past that you're kind of hot and cold with James Cameron, and I'm curious to what your take is with James Cameron.
What my take is with James Cameron, I think James Cameron, in my opinion, is a visionary hack.
A visionary hack?
That's what I think he is. I think he cannot hack, yes. I think he's a visionary. I think he pushes his crews. I think he pushes his performers. I think he has some really strong, clear visions of what he wants when he wants to create it. And he's not willing, he's not opposed to pushing technology to get what he wants. For this one, he developed special communications rigs that had never been done before so that he could actually record their dialogue underwater, and special helmets and all of that. He pushed special elements of Titanic so that the set would flood the way he wants it to flood and repeatedly flood the way, so he could do takes over and over again. He of course, Avatar, everybody knows Avatar. He spent years and years developing the CGI backgrounds and work that he wanted for Avatar. But all of his movies, and I say this, even Terminator, which I like a lot, is derivative of Harlan Ellison and feels like a Twilight Zone episode that's just been kind of reworked a little bit. It's visionary in the way it's shot and what it's done and the way it's directed, but there's nothing original about it, and there's nothing different, and there's nothing unique about it. And sometimes his stories, like in Avatar, are just terrible stories themselves and terrible plotting. You know, if I ask you what the theme of it is and you come up with it's the love story, then, when you're talking about this vastly technological science fiction movie about underwater work and submarines and alien life and everything else, and you go, oh, stress makes a relationship come together, then something's wrong in the storytelling.
Right.
You're
right.
And I think that's my take on him. I think he's a hack. I think he thinks he's such a good writer, but he's not. He's just cribbing off other people. And he should let...
Did he write Aliens?
I don't think he wrote Aliens. He might have. But Aliens, again, even though I like it, it has its own issues too, which is it's like, it's the original with Marines. If one alien was scary, let's add more aliens. He had, I think the original, I think from what I remember from our podcast research, the original writers helped with Aliens. So I think Giler and O'Bannon helped with Aliens, but he also did, which is a key. I mean,
I think he also, he took elements of the mythos that Ridley either cut or did not film from the original,
right?
Too. Like the cocoon stuff and the queen and that kind of thing. That's why I was curious, because there are elements of Aliens that I really like that I just have a feeling he didn't write. Someone else probably.
Yeah, I think Shusett or O'Bannon actually wrote the whole queen idea, and I think Hill and Giler contributed the whole thing of going back. Having to go back, and the aliens have already taken over everything or whatever. So, I mean, he just... Nothing totally rings true in any of his movies. We don't buy the emotional beats, and we don't buy the a lot of the higher emotion in it, even though the action sequences are done really, really well. He films action very well, and he films... and he's got good overall, I think, understanding of how to create a scary scene or how to create a funny scene or a majestic scene. He's big on majesty. He always has been. Since he got money after Terminator, it's big on, I want to take over all of LA's waterfront and have a truck burst into flames off the bridge and then the Terminator walk out of it, And all these vast, big, impressive shots that he does. But there's...
I don't have... Well, I was curious as to your take, and I mean, because I don't know where I really lie with him. I like Terminator, I like Aliens, and I like the first Terminator sequel. I don't remember Avatar, which isn't saying a lot. I need to watch it again. I didn't remember this movie that well. I loathe Titanic. I cannot stand that movie, and a lot of people think I am like the devil himself for saying so.
No, I'm right with you.
Yeah, I can't stand that movie, and if I have to hear Celine Dion sing that song one more time, I'll kill myself. I hate that song, and I hate that movie. But, so, there it is, folks. Send me your hate mail now. But watching this, I enjoyed it. I think more for the performances. And then I also, of course, like you, I'm sure, did your research, read about all the turmoil on the set, which made me have even more appreciation for the acting in this film.
Mm-hmm.
Ed Harris in particular. I mean, we were talking about Stanley Kubrick being brutal to a crew, but it sounds like he was just like a dictator.
Oh, yeah. But you've heard that in all of his movies.
And didn't really care.
If you go back and research...
Yeah, he didn't care if people died.
If you go back and research all of his movies... And that, I think that's unfair to say, really, because a lot of it is secondhand knowledge that we're being reported or told about. But I've heard that on all of his movies. He's a dictator. He's a perfectionist. It's his way or the highway. He screams. He yells. He doesn't care about safety. All that kind of stuff. I've heard all of those. Mm-hmm. And, Ed Harris, I'm sure you read it in the review. I mean, in research of this, Ed Harris has refused to talk about making this movie.
And I read that Ed Harris punched him in the face, too.
Well, yeah, because he almost drowned.
Like multiple times.
Yeah, but the time when he hit him was the water breathing thing, because Cameron wanted it to look so realistic that for the water breathing sequences, he really had a helmet on full of water and held his breath.
Right.
And what they did for the fall was to simulate the fall down the Cayman wall. They actually drug him with a submersible along, sideways along a wall. So it looks like he's falling down, but he's not. Camera's tilted, sort of gag. But
okay.
What happened was they were all used to safety divers. They all did have their own safety divers. One safety diver per actor and per crewman. So there's a lot of people in the water. But your safety diver is there to just watch you. And if you ever give the symbol, he's right there, the signal, he's right there beside you with a rebreather octopus so you can breathe. And what had happened, according to Harris, because he talked about it in the documentary of the movie, I remember, was they were getting ready to shoot the shot. His safety diver got tied up in some cables up above. Well, they're dragging him along. So now that cable guy his safety diver is way behind him. And he signals stop. And there's no safety diver. And he's running out of air. And there's no safety diver. And he's signaling more and more and more. A guy swims over to him, seeing that he might be panicked, gives him a regulator, but it's upside down. And when he breathes it in, it's full of water. So now he's just sucked in water. And the whole time this was going on, Cameron is heard on the thing saying, keep filming. And that's what ticked Harris off. So when his diver finally got to him, and he was pretty panicked, and pretty adrenalized, I'm sure, because he felt like he was drowning. When he got to the surface, he slugged Cameron and said, don't ever do that again, I'll kill you, kind of thing, because Cameron kept filming it, and the director part of me says, would I have done that? Yeah, I probably would have kept filming. I wouldn't have said it, but I probably would have kept filming. But I would have made sure the divers get to him or whatever. But so much peril in this movie. Like when those compartments are flooding and they're running through the set, that's really actors. Those aren't stunt people. And those compartments are really flooding. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I read somewhere that there's hardly any stunt people in this movie.
Yeah. And when they did, they went through weeks and weeks of dive training. They all had to be certified. They spent, 5-6 hours underwater every night, kind of thing. And for those of us who have scuba dived before or whatever, you might spend an hour, you might spend 2 hours, maybe, on a dive, but that's rare. Because your tanks don't last that long. But see, they had tank regenerators in the filming tank, so they could go over and get fueled up, get refueled. But yeah, they were filmed for 5 hours at a time. Master Antonio, when she has to do the whole scene where she doesn't have a suit on, she's being drugged by Ed Harris underwater without a scuba tank. You know, it's like, is this in my contract? I would go, let's renegotiate the salaries here. You know, what do they say in Alien? What about the bonus situation? You know, if you're going to be, if I'm going to be underwater drowned, you know, that's crazy. But yeah, there was a lot of, but there's so much tech that went into the show. I mean, it does show. I mean, I think he's a brilliant hack kind of thing. I mean, it looks great. I mean, they look like they're underwater. All the underwater sequences work really well. And look like they're filmed underwater. They don't look like they're special effects in a tank or whatever. I mean, even the animation on the puppets of the aliens looks great. It looks like they're underwater. It's very kind of E.T.
Well, and this is also, and we can't really discuss this movie without discussing the fact that it is pretty much the test movie for computer generated imagery.
Correct.
Or special effects.
Correct.
A lot of the stuff was being developed as he was filming it. Spielberg was watching it carefully because he was planning on doing Jurassic Park.
Well, you know, this was before Terminator 2.
A lot of it was a gamble.
This was before Terminator 2, and that pseudopod was the test for it, you know, kind of thing. So, and obviously it worked. I mean, it looked great.
And they even filmed certain scenes in certain ways where if it didn't work, they had a plan B.
Yeah, I also...
because they weren't sure that things would work.
And I also read that he actually wrote the script so that entire scene could be cut without it really violating the story, just in case.
And that's the tentacle scene,
yeah,
right?
The pseudopod. Just in case the effects didn't catch up and ILM couldn't do it. But they did, and it looks great. Michael Biehn's performance, although kind of one note all the way through it, I do like in this. This was what, like the third time he'd worked with Cameron?
Yeah, that was another thing I was going to mention, is that you hear these horror stories about him, but he usually has a group of actors that still work with him.
Except for these guys. I mean, Michael Biehn, I don't know if Michael Biehn worked with him after this. And I know Maybe Ed not. Harris and Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio didn't.
Yeah, I've got notes about how much they hated this movie, or they hated making this movie, and wanted to forget it.
Yeah, I think for a lot of them, it was a grind. I mean, I even saw interviews where Cameron was saying the same thing. He was saying it was the hardest movie he's ever made, ever. And some of that has to deal with the pressure of nothing was working. From the very beginning, they had trouble. The tank wasn't ready for them to start, so all the actors show up and they can't shoot there. So they have to go to the secondary tank and shoot there and make stuff up. And the secondary tank wasn't supposed to be ready for 2 weeks, and they had to do it overnight, over like 2 nights, to get it ready. And then things kept going wrong. They were using new technology, so they have all these problems all the time with communication or talking. They're trying to do underwater. On a normal set, actors get bored to death. You're basically sitting there in makeup and costume, ready. You go and shoot your 2-minute scene, then you go and sit down again for 2 more hours. And I remember in the documentary, the guy was saying, yeah, so that's what it's like on a normal movie. Now just do that same thing, only underwater. So you're literally sitting there for 3 hours underwater with nothing to do. So I'm sure it got a little frustrating for people. And, being put in, you and I have talked about, have talked before about actors who, were doing horror movies and they were either afraid of blood, like the girl in, Haunting of Hill House, who didn't like the sight of blood or gore or any of that, and had to do those scenes, or literally afraid of the dark, and they're doing movies where it's dark. But imagine this. I mean, this is underwater, in the dark sometimes. So I'm sure primal fears came into play as well.
Yeah, most definitely. You want to segue a little bit into casting?
Sure.
Since we've talked a little bit about the history and about Cameron and the special effects. I think Ed Harris is perfect in this movie. But then again, I've always liked Ed Harris. I think he's pretty much perfect in whatever he does.
Yep.
However, there were a lot of other guys considered. It's typical 80s actors, lead actors. Mel Gibson was considered. Dennis Quaid, William Hurt, Harrison Ford, Kurt Russell, and Patrick Swayze. And I mean, there are several I could possibly see, but I don't know that they would have been as good, because I think Ed lent himself to that blue collar hero. The fact that he didn't look perfect, the fact that he did have a receding hairline. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, yeah. I totally agree with you. I think he's always been...
He's not a pretty boy.
No, he's always been... but he has those eyes, you know. And there's something that, you know, the same way Hanks has kind of tapped into this, he's the everyman, you know, he's the everybody's favorite kind of thing. Ed Harris has always tapped into this, I'm the strong, heroic type who doesn't look like the hero. You know, all the movies he plays, he's that, from Apollo 13 to, I mean, all of them. He's got that strength of character to him in all of his portrayals. And he had to have that, I think, for, what was his name, Buck in this? So I think he had to have that. And yeah, that was great casting. Now I could see I could see Harrison maybe doing this role. I couldn't see Swayze, though. I don't think that would work.
Not Swayze at all. That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
I don't know about Kurt Russell either.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't agree with either of those.
Now, I could maybe see Mel Gibson doing it, but not William Hurt either.
Well, but Harris also has a way of always blending in with his casts, too. You know, he doesn't just stand out. If it's a Harrison Ford movie or a Mel Gibson movie, it's their movie, you know, kind of thing. Whereas
that's true.
Harris, in a lot of he's that supporting guy who's really good, stands out, but also he can stand into the background and hug on the rest of the cast or whatever, you know, that kind of thing. So I think it was, I agree with that casting a lot.
Well, the only other one I have for Bud was Cameron's other choice, and that was Jeff Bridges.
Ooh. Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I could see that too.
He's got a lot of those same qualities we just talked about. You know, he's good, heroic, but not the most handsome. But, you know, yeah, that's a cool idea. I could see that.
Well, and his dad was on Sea Hunt.
Yes, that's a key. He could have been a Sea Hunt, too.
There you go.
Yeah.
As far as Lindsay, you know, the role played by Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, there were several women up. One was Kathleen Quinlan, Jessica Lange, Deborah Winger, and Barbara Hershey. All of those were considered, which is kind of funny. If it had been Jessica Lange and Jeff Bridges, it would have been like King Kong all over again.
Yeah.
Underwater. The one woman that almost was chosen, or the one woman that would have probably had the part had she not been locked into another movie, was Jamie Lee Curtis. How about that?
Yeah, I don't think I would have bought her as the strong.
I don't think I would have either.
You know, I do like that character development. I've read that Cameron wrote this because he had written a short story when he was in high school about a bunch of divers that breathed the liquid water and lived on a scientists who were in a base near the Cayman Trench. And years later, he resurrected it to be the inspiration for this movie. But he said he based Lindsay's character on Gale Anne Hurd, who he was married to at the time. And I could see that. Very strong. At that time, to be a woman of that much power in Hollywood, Gale Anne Hurd was pretty cool.
She still is.
Well, yes.
She does The Walking Dead.
Oh, she does? I didn't know that. What?
Yeah. She's on The Talking Dead probably twice a year on Chris Hardwick's couch talking about the show. Yeah.
Well, she's definitely great. And hasn't she gone on to direct, I think, now?
I don't know. She's a power producer, though. She's done a lot of stuff. And I did read, since you bring it up, that a lot of people see the Ed Harris or Bud Brigham, Lindsey Brigham relationship as a mirror to Cameron and Gale Anne Hurd because they were splitting up at the time.
Yeah.
But he still wanted her to produce this movie. He was having an affair with Catherine Bigelow, who had just cast Jamie Lee Curtis in Blue Steel, which is why she couldn't do this movie.
Makes sense.
So there's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff going on in this movie, too, as far as politics and production.
Well, and there is a Gale Anne Hurd key in the fact that she also produced Armageddon, which you just mentioned.
That's
so there you go.
Yeah, that's funny. There. You just brought that up. In finishing with casting, though, I don't have much else other than Chris Elliott also auditioned for the hippie role, but he got cast as a minor role.
Good.
I'm not sure what that guy's name was, but and then Commodore DeMarco was supposed to be Lance Henriksen, but he had a conflict.
Oh, that would have been great.
And that's another one of Cameron's clique, I guess you would say, as far as actors.
The only one that
returning actors.
The only one that I had that was kind of casting related was Lou. The character of Lou was played by Kid Brewer, who was actually from Raleigh, North Carolina, and he actually he's one of the miners or the oil guys, but he actually committed suicide a couple of years after the movie was released. That's a little bit of trivia.
I heard about that.
Yeah, I like what
because it was rumored that he drowned or something, and
and
it's been clarified that no, he killed himself a few years later. Yeah,
One Night, the girl that played One Night, Kimberly Scott, I thought she was great. I would love to see her in some other stuff, or love to look her up because I thought she.
I kind of like the guy that plays Catfish.
Oh,
too.
He was great too. Yeah.
A lot of good character work.
Yeah.
But, who wouldn't bond when you're in that kind of situation?
True.
It's like us against him.
Yeah. That director sucks, man. He's going to put us back in the water.
Yeah, exactly.
But I thought but I thought cast overall was one of the strengths of this movie. And
absolutely,
there's definitely chemistry to them. There's interplay. A lot of times, though, I mean, the keys that I got out of it was very much like The Thing, very much like Carpenter's The Thing, and Alien. That kind of working class guys who are in a high risk environment who are being called upon to do something they never would have done normally. Kind of thing.
Yeah, you had said that keys would come to me, and that one actually came to me while we were talking.
Oh yeah,
because it's the blue collar. It's a blue collar sci-fi film.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Just like The Thing, just like Alien.
Right.
Yeah.
What about the bonus situation? Let's talk about that. Yeah. And then again, he kind of pegged a little bit from Aliens in the fact that he has a strong female. Who is pitted against the military and has to, show them how to do it right, kind of thing. I just think, critics. Okay, are we through with casting? You think we go with casting?
Yeah, I think so.
I think Well, we could do a bunch on the tech of this. I think the technical aspects of this are great all the way through. The sets are well designed and they look realistic and they're great. The lighting works, all of that. But I have to go.
Yeah, all the blues are really pretty too.
I have to go back to the shortcoming of this movie is what critics didn't like too, which was especially the last act. They said, this movie is basically man against machine kind of thing until you get to the last act, and suddenly it takes this fantasy turn, and you go, "What's going on?" And I could buy that, but again, I'm like a big E.T. fan too, so I was kind of like, "Yay!"
It's got a huge Deus Ex Machina.
Oh my God!
Except instead of God, it's aliens.
Yeah.
That step in and save the day.
And that was my key too. I said, "Oh, okay. So I think Stargate Atlantis took this city or this ship or this whatever it is that kind of floats to the surface with everybody as a key." But we don't. There's never any direct communication with these NTIs, which is what they call them instead of ETs or aliens. They say NTIs, right? Still an ET or an alien. There's never any direct communication. I mean, Bud basically says, why did you save me? And he says, they say his last message back to him, which is, love you, wife, and knew it was a one-way trip, but I had to take it, that kind of thing. In the extended version, that scene makes a lot more sense because they have the whole thing with all the tidal waves and everything else. Basically, in all the scenes they cut, when Bud is down there and in his little, air bubble that they've created for him, he says, he kind of tries to talk to them, and instead they show him these news broadcasts, which are showing almost all the coastlines of the world have tidal waves heading toward them. And it's going to essentially wipe out most of humanity because these are, huge tidal waves. And they stop it, the aliens do, because of what he said to Lindsay and because of his last two messages. And that's why they stop the tidal waves, and that's why they finally decide to make their presence known and surface.
So, in other words, the aliens at the bottom of the ocean are not too far off from Michael Rennie in The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Right, yeah.
We're going to destroy you. Oh, wait a minute. You show love, so we will save you, or what have you.
So we will save you. Yes. But without that, I mean, even with that, it's the big proliferation thing, because he actually at one point, I think in the extended version, he says, why are you doing this? Why are you destroying most of the planet? And they show him just tapes of nuclear explosions going off. So it's Cameron's big take on nuclear proliferation, and that makes sense. That ties back to that ties back to coffee, and that ties back to the whole missile thing and everything else. Bringing the nuke on the ship and all of that thing. But without it, that whole ending just kind of comes literally out of nowhere. I mean, we knew that. I even remember the first time I saw this, I knew that Bud was probably going to see the aliens. Mm-hmm. I didn't think they were going to fly him over Atlantis there or whatever and put him in a little chamber and then bring him all to the surface. Mm-hmm. But, there's no real reason for it. We've had no communication with these creatures, so why would they do that? Mm-hmm. And even after they float everything up, there's no communication. Suddenly, boom, we're done. That's the end. Yeah, there's no denouement. There's no nothing. There's no explanation.
Yeah, I think I know one of the reasons why I didn't like it is. There are two really powerful scenes. The whole sequence where they're fighting coffee in the submergibles and they watch him go over the abyss and die. Mm-hmm. And then there's this flooding and she has to sacrifice herself and then he has to bring her back. I mean, that's like 20 minutes of heart-pounding suspense that is just some of the finest out there. And then you've also got the same when Ed Harris's character, Bud, is falling into the abyss. And he just keeps falling. And they keep saying how many feet he's falling. And you just, and he's starting to type, gibberish on his communicator. And all of that stuff is just great movie making. And then, and then it's like the ending just doesn't live up to that. It's like a cop-out almost. And I think it's like what Wendell, our friend from childhood, would say is a could have been. That makes it worse than a failure. It's because it had so much promise, and then they just threw it away.
Yeah, you spend this entire movie basically with the theme of man against nature, man against machine, man against man. Those three basic elemental themes are all three in this movie. But there's, and they resolve the man against man one by Coffee dying. They resolve the man against nature. They don't really, because they're essentially running out of oxygen. And unless the guys on the top side can save them, they're going to die. And that's the same thing with machine. Their machines can't save them, kind of thing. But there's no reason for this ending. There's no. It makes no sense of why anybody did anything, why the aliens did that. Because Lindsay was nice to them, I don't understand that at all.
No, and it's almost I don't know. It's still in the 80s, even though it's 1989. So it's like that cliched happy 80s ending too. When he comes walking out, I'm like, oh fuck. I'm like, this is so hokey.
I mean, they could have just had something else. Like they could have had the umbilical coming down so that they could all be essentially rescued. And maybe they're going up in the decompression tanks, which they have. They have their own decompression vessels in order to go to the surface. And maybe right before they get to the surface, they see one or two of the aliens. Or then they see Brinkman. Or something. Maybe they just bring him back, and it becomes a secret to all of them when they're on the surface. They have to say, decide, are we going to tell anybody or not? That to me would have been more realistically compelling than we're going to float every ship in the mile radius up on our big alien city ship floating underwater thing, purple, whatever,
Well, if I needed another reason to hate James Cameron, I can give it to you. He enlisted Orson Scott Card to write the novelization of this movie. I don't know if you know anything about Orson Scott Card or have heard me rant and rave about him before.
He's a sci-fi writer, I know that.
He's a science fiction writer, so most science fiction writers don't do novelizations. But I think they threw a lot of money at him, and Cameron, I guess, was friends with him. I don't know. He wrote Ender's Game, which was a lackluster movie with Harrison Ford not long ago, but it was a very popular novel when it came out. He is a notorious homophobe. And if you don't believe me, all you have to do is Google his name and the word homosexual, and you will see a litany of propaganda out there that he has authored in his, I guess, fight against homosexual agenda or whatever have you. I don't know. It's a lot of BS, and I have hated him ever since. So I was glad when that movie failed. Yeah. So just had to throw that out there. Had to get on my soapbox for a second.
You do that.
Yeah. So not everything is great and hopeful in science fiction, and that includes Mr. Orson Scott Card.
Well, yeah, I'd only read Ender's Game. I think he had another one that was like
he had some sequels.
Somebody recommended it to me. No, this was not a sequel to it. This was something else he wrote. Because I remember his big heyday was like in the 80s. That's when he really wrote a lot of stuff.
Yeah. I've always referred to him as the Dr. Laura of science fiction. So,
Okay, that's pretty good. But yeah, he did solicit him to do it, and from what I understand, he wrote like backstories.
He did
for like Coffee and Lindsay and Bud and all them.
And apparently he did it, but while the movie was in production, so that they could use it, like to read and build character on. Mm-hmm. Is what I read, but yeah, well, whatever.
And the movie, definitely pushed special effects. It won an Oscar for special effects, so that's good.
Apparently, they pushed really hard for Michael Biehn to be nominated for supporting actor, and it didn't work.
See, I wouldn't have given it to him even if he'd been nominated. You know what I mean? Because I thought he did an okay job, but it's very one note all the way through.
I would have given it to his mustache.
I would.
I mean, that's a Snidely Whiplash mustache if I've ever seen one.
Yeah,
it's like, I'm the villain. I have a mustache.
It's nowhere near Kurt Russell in,
Hateful Eight.
That's the mustache of all time. That and Tombstone.
Or him or Sam Elliott.
Yeah.
Oh. We're going to have a mustache digression. Is it November? No, it's not. Movember.
Trying to look for keys.
Yeah, I was going to say we should probably move on to keys. I did have one little trivia here that this movie is not available yet in high def.
Oh no,
yeah,
still not.
Isn't that weird?
It's hard to find this movie. Yeah, I'm curious as to know why, but maybe it's an audio thing. But Cameron is such a perfectionist anyway. Everybody's still waiting for, Avatar 2, and it's been 7 years or something.
Well, it took that long for the first one.
Well, yeah. But when even in this one, I mean, he went like $4 million over budget. They were weeks and weeks behind schedule because he wanted what he wanted, kind of thing. But I mean, it does show. Technically, I think this film is very, very good,
and it's very exciting in parts.
Even down to
like you were talking about with the flooding of and running through doors and sealing off chambers. All that stuff's very well done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and all the filming underwater. We've got to swim from this tank to this tank without a suit, and everything else looks good, looks realistic. It works. The CGI we've already talked about works. I think the blending works. I mean, I think you would be hard pressed to see which scenes were underwater, which scenes were not underwater and filmed with miniatures, and which scenes were actually computer enhanced or stunt doubles, kind of thing. The breathing water the hydrocarbon fluid was great, and they really did that with the rat, by the way. So that was kind of a cool thing.
They got in some trouble for that, or not really trouble. Yeah, well, they just a lot of people were not happy with them because of it.
People.
Well, that poor rat.
But
fuck Ed Harris, let him drown.
Fine. As a matter of fact, technically they did 5 different rats. And they all lived. There was no problem with the rat. The rat survived. So, actually, I felt more sorry for the rat in Andromeda's Train than I did this rat. So that's a personal key for me.
Well, it's also 20 years earlier when there were probably less regulation as far as PETA and animals in films, too.
True. I do want to say that I got this key last night when I was watching it. Deep Core, which is the term, which is the name of the mining rig that they used. It reminded me a lot of the design of the Nostromo in Alien. Mm-hmm. The way the legs were, the 4 legs, and the way it kind of moved along the ocean, and during the crash.
Dennis was watching the beginning of it with me, and he was like, do they really have those things down there? I was like, I don't know. I said, it's cool, though.
And I've got a challenge, because if you can't answer it, maybe some of our listeners can. when I was watching the whole thing with the crane, because of the hurricane on the surface and because they can't unclip their umbilical to the surface, they end up getting dragged to the edge of the Cayman Shelf, and then they're kind of stuck there, and they literally pull the entire crane down from the ship. So it's descending, X number of hundreds of feet down in the water, and the little umbilical is coiling on the sand, and then the crane lands with a big crash, and they all go, whew, and then it slowly falls over the side of the Cayman and then starts dragging them. And you're going, oh no, oh no, oh no. That reminded me of something, but I cannot put the key on it. I don't know what movie it was, but it reminded me of something else in another movie where that exact same thing happened.
Yeah, and now I can't think of it either, but I know what you mean. Where you think everything is safe, and then it continues to happen, basically.
Yeah, where you see the actual piece of equipment and it stopped, and you think, phew. But then the way it stopped, it suddenly, gravity takes it, and suddenly now you're all scared again. But I cannot remember the movie. So if you're out there listening and you know what key I'm referencing, let me know.
Yeah, any listeners out there, it's going to be bothering us for a while, so please let us know. You're right. There is. Well, it's probably because it's a cliche in a way. It's probably happened in more than one movie, and that's why we can't pinpoint it. Is what I'm thinking.
Could be. Yep, that could be. What about you? Any keys from you?
I started to mention the alien thing, Armageddon, blue collar crew. It's like blue collar sci-fi, what have you. So there is that. One of the things that I thought of while we were talking early on about how this underwater movie was plagued with problems from the get-go, I thought of Jaws, because Spielberg was too. He had all kinds of problems with that movie, and
true.
It's ironic, I think, that he was watching the production of this movie for special effects reasons, but he probably was reminiscing at the same time, like, glad that's not me.
Yeah.
Good
luck with that, buddy.
Yeah, exactly. I've had my share of that. I'm not doing it again.
Yeah, I could see that.
So, yeah, I would say Jaws would be a big key. I mentioned Snidely Whiplash.
You did.
The fact that Michael Biehn is really good in this, and mustaches have come and gone. I had one in the 80s too. They're not very popular anymore, and they did used to be associated with villainy in the early era of film. Goatees and mustaches were always interpreted as very evil and bad.
Remember Spock from Mirror Mirror? Mm-hmm. He was bad. He had to have a goatee.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the only other keys I can think of are basically Cameron sequels that this movie led to, which, like you said, the effects led to the second Terminator movie, and I'm sure a lot of the underwater stuff led to Titanic.
Mm-hmm.
So did you have any unique ones that I'm missing? Because...
Nope.
Yeah.
I think that pretty much covers all the ones that we have.
Okay.
Actually.
So, I mean, that's a good argument for saying that it is somewhat original, that it's not that derivative of other movies.
Well, I don't think anybody else wants to try to champion the excess of trying to film something like this underwater again, kind of thing. But which says a lot about it, again. But it's because I did enjoy the movie. I do like it. Even the ending, I kind of go, well, the Spielberg side of me goes, oh, that's cute, because, I mean, AI kind of ends the same way with this kind of happy, altruistic ending at the end of it that you're going, where did that come from? That's literally 2,000 years later. Why are we watching this kind of thing that comes out of nowhere almost?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what this is. But I do think it was worth the money. I think you see the dollars on the screen. I in the documentary I watched, I remember Gale Ann Hurd was talking about how the studio would come in and they would go, "Why are wetsuits costing so much?" And they would go, "Well, because we're shooting underwater every single day, and wetsuits are not just what they're doing. That's what the crew wears, but it's also the uniforms it's the costuming. And we have to have new ones because they're being eaten away by the amount of chlorine we're putting in the water." So
I did think of a couple of other keys, and they're movies that came out almost simultaneously. I don't know if there was some, bet between directors, but there was a movie called Leviathan, and there was a movie called Deep Star 6, and they came out around the same time.
Yeah. And if you watch because I watched both of those, and if you watch those, you see the real power of Cameron as an auteur sort of thing, because you can tell the scenes that are not filmed underwater.
Okay.
And faked underwater and everything in those. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I saw Leviathan, but it was as long ago as this, so I don't remember it at all. And I don't know that I saw Deep Star at all.
You reminded me of a key because of the opening shot of this is with the submarine crew, and I'm a sucker for submarine movies. I love submarine movies. But it reminded me of Hunt for Red October, Crimson Tide, the way the boomer ship, the way the warship is shown.
Well, if you're going to go there, I can go one further and just say "Run Silent, Run Deep" with Clark Gable.
Yeah, but it doesn't have a boomer in it because they didn't have those.
Yeah.
So,
And what's that PT-109? And what about 20,000 Leagues?
No.
What about 20,000 Leagues? That's a big key. That's a Disney key.
Wait, that is a big key because of the way the big helmets are and they're walking on the bottom of the ocean kind of thing. That is a good key. That's a good one.
See, I'm full of them. I just don't even know it.
Oh, sometimes they just occur.
Sometimes they fall out me butt.
Okay, cool. So, I think overall we're mixed on it as far as recommendations. Go see it if you like it, but it definitely takes a weird turn at the end.
Yeah, it's worth it for the performances, and it's worth it for the advancement in special effects technology. That's how I would sum it up.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Cool.
So.
Well, Tim, thanks for playing with me again.
Yeah.
And I guess we will do this again next week and tackle something from your genre.
Yeah, I think we're actually going to go way back to the 40s on the next one. So,
sweet.
Fun times.
All right.
We'll talk to you later.